Secret of the Silver Key, written by Phyllis J. Perry. Welcome back, warrior friends. We are ready for Chapter 8. Deep in thought, Fribble slowly turned around to the librarian. You said we had 2 clues. One clue was that the buffalo balloon was the very first airmail stamp. What's the other clue? Mrs. Scurry smiled. The book also gave us the name of the balloonist who flew the buffalo balloon stamp, or the buffalo balloon. It was Samuel Archer King, remember? Right, Fribble said, his long tail lashed through the air. Would there be a book about him in the biographies? Well, that's a good idea, Fribble, though I don't think our library has a whole book about him, she said, but it is worth checking the computer catalog. Mrs. Scurry and Scamper followed along as Fribble quickly went over to the computer and typed in Samuel Archer King. There was no matches. Fribble sat back in his seat and he sighed. He wished he could read more about the first balloon mail flight. Lots of folks must have watched it. Maybe Postmaster Fleet Milton was there. Where else could he look? Suddenly, Fribble squeaked and he sat up straight. Of course, the internet, he said out loud. That's another good idea, Mrs. Scurry agreed. And you know how to use it. Let me know if you need any help or if you find anything. Off she went, back to her desk to assist another woman who was waiting. Fribble slid out of his seat and he headed over to one of the library computers that was connected to the internet. Scamper followed quickly behind him on his heels, and Fribble typed in Samuel Archer King's name. Several sites popped up, and Fribble clicked on the first one, and he began to read, mumbling to himself. What does it say? Scamper demanded. Lots of stuff, Fribble said. King made dozens of balloon trips, and they didn't all turn out well. His balloon was called the Buffalo, and it drifted wherever it wanted to go. Sometimes it landed in the trees. Ouch, Scamper said. Did Mr. King fly all by himself? Did he go very far? Well, it says here that there was a big crowd of people who saw him off the day he took the airmail. He went 26 miles from Nashville, Tennessee to Gatlin, Tennessee. And he tossed some of the letters overboard as he went. He threw the letters away, Scamper said. Boy, I wouldn't want him for my mailman. Well, Fribble said, it says that he hoped that people who found them would take the letters to the closest post office. And the letters that he didn't toss overboard, he mailed himself when he landed at Gatlin. Fribble took another entry. This one is called Postmasters Gather for a Big Balloon Event. Quickly, Fribble clicked on the site and he began to read the article that came up. It was an old newspaper story from the Nashville Gazette dated July 1st, 1877. What does it say? Said Scamper. Well, it was written by a reporter called John Leonard, and it says that J.H. Sneevy designed the buffalo balloon stamp and that there was only 23 that were used. And listen to this. Fribble's whiskers began to quiver. Postmasters from all over came to the big event, including Amos Brooke from Switzerland, Illinois, Nibbles Trapp from Brighton, Missouri, and Fleet Milton from Munster, Wisconsin. Fribble jumped to his feet in excitement as he read this bit of news. Our very own postmaster, Fleet Milton, was watching the buffalo balloon take off, Fribble said. His eyes glittered with excitement. I'll bet he bought the stamps that day and saved them in his special box. Let's go tell Mrs. Scurry what you found, Scamper said. With great excitement, Fribble and Scamper went over to the librarian's desk. Guess what? Fribble said. The postmaster from Munster was at the first airmail balloon trip. It said so in an old newspaper article on the internet. Mrs. Scurry went with them back to the computer. After she read the article, she seemed almost as excited as they were. She printed out a copy of the newspaper article and gave it to Fribble. "You know, Fribble," said Mrs. Scurry, "I'm not a stamp collector, and your buffalo balloon isn't an official stamp that's printed by the U.S. government. But it does seem to be a rather special stamp. Sometimes old stamps can be worth a lot of money." "Really?" Fribble said. "But it says right on my stamp that it's only worth 5 cents. Well, the stamp may have been worth 5 cents in postage back in 1877, but that was a very long time ago, more than 100 years. "So it's an antique?" said Fribble. "Well, I don't think they usually call stamps antiques," Mrs. Scurry said, "but they are called collectibles, and there's books on collecting stamps and coins. I know that their value depends on how rare they are and in what good condition they're in. Someone in one of those stamp and coin shops could probably tell you just how much your stamp is worth." Fribble and Scamper said goodbye to Mrs. Scurry, and they headed for home. Fribble had a lot on his mind. Were the stamps in his special baseball chest really valuable? And if they were, did he want to sell them? He thought about the autographed baseball in Mrs. Slipper's antique shop that he'd love to buy, if only he had enough money. Should he sell the stamps and buy the ball, or save them and start his own collection? It would be exciting to start collecting stamps just like Postmaster Fleet Milton, and he could start his collection with the buffalo balloon stamp. Fribble didn't know what he wanted to do. He was confused and he needed to talk to someone. "Let's stop and visit Mrs. Slippers," he suggested. "She'll want to know what we found out." "Auntie Q," said Scamper. A happy smile spread over his face. "Do you think she'll make us some tea?" "Maybe," Fribble said. They turned down the block to Edam Street, and Fribble was soon twisting the old bell on Mrs. Slipper's shop. When she came to the door and found Fribble and Scamper, Mrs. Slippers smiled. "Well, hello. What a good time for you to stop by. I was just about to make myself a cup of tea. Would you two join me?" "Yes," Scamper said. "All right then, I'll meet you at the back kitchen door." Once they were inside, it took no time at all for Mrs. Slippers to brew a pot of chamomile tea and to set out the cups and saucers on the table, along with a plate of cookies. As they sipped and they nibbled, Fribble told Mrs. Slippers about their recent discoveries at the library. My, she said, "you have been busy." "But I can't decide what to do," Fribble said. "If the stamps are really valuable, like Mrs. Scurry thinks, I could sell them and maybe buy the Slugger McGraw autographed home run ball. But I've been reading about stamps, and I think I might want to start my own collection, and the buffalo balloon would be a great one to start with." "Well, that is a hard choice," Mrs. Slippers agreed, "and only you can decide. Take your time. Those stamps have been waiting in the postmaster's chest for well over 100 years. They can wait a few more days until you're sure you know what you want to do." After their tea, Fribble and Scamper thanked Mrs. Slippers, and they started for home. While they walked along, Scamper chatted about how much he liked tea and cookies with Auntie Q, but Fribble was quiet and thoughtful. He was still busy thinking, what should he do about his stamps? Over dinner, Fribble said, "I used the yellow pages in the phone book to look up a stamp shop here in town. There's one over on Bridge Street. I was wondering if maybe I could go there on Saturday and ask somebody at the shop about my stamps." "I think that's a smart idea," Fribble's father said, "and I would be glad to drive you there." "Thanks, Dad," Fribble said. "Can I come too?" asked Scamper. "Of course," his father agreed. It might be a good idea, Fribble, to call ahead of time and make sure that the owner or somebody who knows a lot about stamps will be there on Saturday morning. You'll need to talk to someone who can answer all your questions. I'll call the shop tomorrow, right after school, Fribble promised. That night, before he went to bed, Fribble took the key from around his neck, and he opened his box. He pulled out his baseball stuff and then removed the bottom box and took out the envelope with the stamps in it. Fribble took the stamps over to his bedside lamp and he studied them closely. He wanted to be the proud owner of the Slugger McGraw home run baseball, and if he sold the stamps, he might have enough money to buy it. But he liked owning the Buffalo balloon stamp too. Fribble felt pulled in two directions. And that's where chapter 8 ends. What would you do? Would you sell the stamps so that you could go buy your favorite thing? Or would you keep the stamps and start your own collection? Fribble's got a tough choice. Join me next time and we'll find out in chapter 9 what Fribble decides to do.